My name is Phil Goddard, and welcome to Bourne Environmental Review. This is a show I'm taping on December 6, 2017. It's my first show of the year. A little late this year, as I did last year. I hope to change that in 2018 and have more episodes and bring more interesting topics to the viewers of Bourne. Over the years, I've done many shows about the military base and the cleanup, National Marine Life Center, and the projects that they're working on, as well as a whole host of other topics. And the topic I want to talk about tonight and introduce to you is one that's been working in the background for quite a while and is of interest to me personally, as I actually wondered if the Cape Cod Canal ever could be used for electricity generation. And I actually drew some sketches in a book about how we would use the thrust of the tidal flow through the canal 4 times a day, in and out, with all that energy. Certainly, couldn't we use that to recover energy? And it turns out that you probably can. And so my guest today is going to talk about an unbelievable opportunity that the town of Bourne has, as it's now going to be a test center for developing this technology uniquely in the United States of America, and developing what I'm hearing now is the new phrase called the blue economy. And that we'll talk a little bit about that with my guest tonight. Welcome, John Miller.
Thank you.
Executive Director of the Marine Renewable Energy Collaborative. Did I get it right? And what is the website, just for the folks, if you could let them know?
www.MRECO, M-R-E-C-O, New England, no dots, .org.
Okay. And the phone number is 508-728-5825.
Correct.
So for the viewers, let's just start at the beginning and kind of walk through what the collaborative is and who's involved and what the project is that they've been reading about in the papers and hearing about, and why Bourne is the ideal location for what you're trying to do.
Okay. The Marine Renewable Energy Collaborative is a nonprofit dedicated to helping companies or researchers and universities commercialize new ocean renewable technology. Ocean renewable technology has a very broad span, going from offshore wind, wave and tidal. There's things called salinity differential,
really?
OTEC.
Oh,
so there's a number of different technologies that have some promise and are being investigated. But today, primarily, we're interested in wave and tidal energy, and particularly tidal energy. There's a pretty good history in New England of tidal energy being developed here in our universities. We have a tremendous intellectual capital in the universities here. But as it stands today, the barriers to developing a new tidal device are huge. The cost, the harsh environment, the regulatory environment are just incredibly bad. I was at a conference about 6 years ago where they had 6 CEOs of renewable companies, of marine renewable companies. And those 6 CEOs talked back and forth and came to a consensus that it would take 10 years and $80 million to develop a new tidal device. Now that was 8 years ago. At that time, all 6 of them thought they were close to having a device on the web, on the grid. And today, half of those companies are out of business, and the other half are just at the point of getting something on the grid. So they underestimated it.
Wow, wow.
It's extremely expensive in the environment today. As we started looking at that, we said, the way we can help these companies best is try to help them develop, or for us to develop, pre-permitted test sites. So somebody can come in, any company, any researcher could come in, and for a reasonable amount of money, test something. Again, today, the risk, the cost, all of those things stop somebody from even wanting to try. Actually, over 20 years ago, there was testing in the Cape Cod Canal by a professor named Gorloff from Northeastern. And he had a new type of technology which Northeastern then patented, and they tested it successfully, a couple of different variations, right at the railroad bridge. And that's why I'd first become interested in the railroad bridge as a test site.
Why didn't it go forward?
They successfully tested it and patented and licensed a patent to a company.
And someone's making electricity with it?
There are companies that are employing that technology, yes.
In America?
Similar technologies. There are some variations of it, and I'm not sure
Not large scale, though.
No, nothing on the grid yet.
Right. Okay, so it's very small scale.
Yep.
Okay.
Very much so. There was another company that actually Congressman Studs had gotten funding for a tidal test, and a company from Florida came up and did a test. They were less successful because they put the device too close to the shore. And if you put something close to shore, the drag of the shore reduces the amount of water flow. You know, in tidal energy, there are two types of tidal devices. There are those that are based on position or potential energy, and that's like a dam. So there's things called barrages. There's one up in Canada. There's one in France. One in France has been on the grid since the 70s.
Right, I think I've heard
and
of
generates
that.
240.
Brest?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
240 megawatts of electricity.
That's significant.
Good technology, works well, but like any hydroelectric dam, it has a tendency to kill the estuary behind it because you cut down the flow of
So
water
you hold
back
back
and forth.
water and release it, hold back water, release it.
Yeah, so you don't allow the mixing that you normally have in an
Which
estuary.
is devastating to estuary
So
systems.
none of those are being built in the Western Hemisphere. They're being built in China and Korea, but not in the Western Hemisphere. Instead, we've gone to what's called hydrokinetic, which is the energy of motion. So we're talking about devices that go into water flow, and the water flow causes them to turn primarily. Most of them today look like wind turbines on steroids.
Well, what people don't realize, you know, I'm not a physicist, but essentially air is a fluid and water's a fluid. It's just the density is different. So really, are the dynamics, aerodynamics and hydrodynamics very similar?
Very similar. Water is 800 times more dense than air.
Right.
So big differences in the impact, but again, they're both fluids. You can model them with CFD, computational fluid dynamics, in similar ways. There are some concerns. I have concerns about it because, again, today most of the devices look like wind turbines on steroids.
Right.
Smaller, more robust to be able to survive in the ocean. You know, if you have a 6-knot flow, which is a little more in the Cape Cod Canal, 6-knot flow is the equivalent of a 400-mile-an-hour wind. So huge forces. And that's been one of the biggest problems is putting those devices in those waters, which really exist in northern areas like Scotland and the Bay of Fundy.
Bay of Fundy with a huge
Exactly.
difference in tidal.
All of them have had their blades fall off. And that's a huge problem. And so it's slowed that market. I tell people it's very much like if when we first had people developing wind turbines, somebody said, hey, the best wind in the United States is on top of Mount Washington. And they went there to do their testing.
Yeah, everything.
Today, we wouldn't have a wind industry. We'd have a lot of broken turbines on top of Mount Washington.
I would think the gear ratios are very, I don't know what the word is, high or low, but they would need a lot of energy to turn them.
Yep.
And so they're geared totally differently than wind.
Exactly
so
right.
It takes a lot of energy just to move it in first gear because of the density you were talking about. Is that true?
Yes, what we call high torque, low speed.
Right.
So you end up having to have gearing to speed the rotation up.
But that's a lot of energy then into the copper wires and such.
Tremendous amount of energy.
And so that's why this is so exciting.
Yes, absolutely.
And how did this all get started? Did you say, I want to form this and went to the legislature or went to some entities that were mentioned on your website in articles, the New England Marine Energy Development System and the Seaport Economic Council? Who's involved in paying for all of this to get up and running?
What happened was I was running a technology center for University of Massachusetts. And we were the only, no center in Massachusetts was doing marine renewables. We had formed a center for marine renewables, and we were able to raise about $3 million. We did a lot of research.
So you were an employee of the UMass
correct.
system.
And we formed this center. We worked with the School of Marine Science at UMass.
You start with Dartmouth?
Yes.
Okay.
And we were doing a lot of work with a Muskegon Channel because there's a good tidal resource
Between
there.
Nantucket and
Martha's Vineyard, right.
And there's a natural choke point, and if anybody's
Exactly
put their
right.
thumb over a hose, it increases
The velocity.
the
correct.
velocity, which is energy. So it's a similar type of thing. Let's take advantage of that. Yeah.
So we're doing some very good work. University of Massachusetts Dartmouth had some financial issues. We were actually under economic development rather under research. And they wanted to cut down on the amount they were putting into economic development activities, so they shut down the center. And so we
They
formed a
meaning
nonprofit.
The UMass system.
Right.
You were under economic development umbrella of
Right.
of the state of Massachusetts UMass system. Okay.
So we took that center and we formed a nonprofit because we thought what we were doing was important. Obviously, then we started looking for money on how we could do some of the things we wanted to do. At about that time, the Seaport Economic Council formed. The Seaport Economic Council was a creation of the Baker administration. They saw a program called the Seaport Advisory Council, which was a fund that was used for primarily infrastructure improvement in some of the big cities, some of the big ports.
Federal or state?
No, state.
State. Okay.
In some of the big ports. And they said, this money could be used more effectively for economic development if we spread it across these 78 seaport communities. And part of that, they said, is we want to fund some innovation. So we were looking to find a way to fund this, and it just hit perfectly on timing. The other piece there was the local representative, Representative Vieira, was absolutely critical in seeing the opportunity, getting the town of Bourne involved in it, excited about it, and helping us bring together the right people for the proposal.
I know the town of Bourne, our selectmen had to sign off on this and take some
Absolutely.
risk in allowing this to happen.
Yep.
What was it that the town of Bourne signed on for exactly?
Primarily, they had to be a co-sponsor.
A co-sponsor of the
And-
application to the Seaport
Right,
Economic Council.
Right. And they also offered some match. There was a requirement for matching funds, and again, being a nonprofit, we didn't have a lot of capability to do that.
So the town of Bourne's on the hook for matching some money?
Yes.
How much?
Not money, in-kind matches.
So
So we have the opportunity to use the community center for meetings.
Gotcha.
They've been very helpful in doing that. They've offered us some boat support, things that they could do within the current budget, but help us out.
That's good for the viewers to know in Bourne that we're not talking taxpayer dollars investing in this.
No,
So you formed a nonprofit out of the UMass system. Are you still a state employee?
no, we're
So
totally,
you left
Yep.
and created this. Is UMass a partner, or are they?
We worked with them with some of the environmental surveys we did. We had to do environmental surveys of the site, and they were done by University of Massachusetts.
But you're not. UMass is not officially on the board of directors or
No.
part
No.
of the structure.
they
You
work
kind of
with
went
us.
on as an entrepreneurial activity in a way,
Absolutely.
and so you're funded as the executive director of a nonprofit.
Correct.
Okay, so that's good to know. But it came out of the UMass system, and of course now they are interested in what you do. I would imagine.
Yeah.
The whole system.
Again, they've been, again, it was purely a budgetary decision. They made it at that time, and we continue to work with the school and the marine science very effectively. So
And Chancellor Meehan, is that the right title? Marty Meehan runs the UMass system. Is it Chancellor?
President.
President. Okay, so he's aware of what's going on. Maybe they will look to invest in at some point, or
I don't know what his interest is. Again, we work with the technical people at the School of Marine Science, and
so New England Marine Energy Development System. What is that?
well, again, when we looked at this, we said the problem is that if you're developing a new device, if you're a professor, you'd have to be insane to want to develop a device for hydrokinetics. The risk, the cost, everything else is just too much. So we said, how can we help them? And the way we said that we could help them is by developing a system of test sites. The Department of Energy said what you need to do in developing a new technology is put it into steps. And what they took was a thing called the technology readiness level, which was developed by NASA for developing spaceships, right? Because you don't want to put somebody up in the air until you've tested it well beforehand.
Right.
So they have very deliberate steps. And those technology readiness levels, we said, okay, let's try to develop test sites for each of those things so that people here in New England can bring a product all the way through the
Step
process.
one, step two, boom.
Right. So there's about 4 steps. I mean, there's actually 10 individual steps, but there's about really 4 steps. The first step is in a university, in a tank, in a test tank where you do something real small, you do components, things like that. We have those. There are a number of test tanks in the region, in Massachusetts and other states. The next step is you take something that's maybe a meter or 3 feet in diameter and put it in a flow of water. Well, what we did is we worked with the Connie Fish Center in western Massachusetts, where they have these flumes that are about 10 feet wide, about 3 meters, and they can get fast water through them. So we have an agreement to help them find companies to test in those flumes.
Scaling it up and up.
Then the next step is go from 1 meter to 3 meters. And this is really the critical point. Going from tank to full size, which the big ones now are 10 meters, you need an intermediate point to make sure it works in the ocean in real conditions. Because everybody who's gone from the tank to full size has broken their systems. They've lost their blades and they've had to go back and start over. And that is not good when you're trying to raise money.
Right, right.
So the 3 meter size is that sweet spot in between. And that's what the Bourne Tidal test site is. Eventually we want to develop a full-scale test site in the Muskegon Channel, but again, that's a ways off.
National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL. I remember hearing about them. Is that anything applicable to this? Because they work in renewable technologies. Are there grants available for you from them?
They do not have their own funding. They get funding from the Department of Energy and from individual industry.
Do they give out grants though? Or?
We're talking to them.
You are, okay.
We're very much, we actually put in a proposal with them last year. We were unsuccessful. But yeah, the point now is we have the structure. We have something that is unique in the United States and probably the world. It's a structure in a fast-moving body of water where you can lower a turbine in and take it back out very easily and be able to do that kind of testing. So it essentially has a lot of the control of being in a laboratory,
right,
but it's in real ocean water.
So this is what's called the Bourne Tidal test site.
Right.
And we have some video
I just want to say, NREL is critical in helping us put the right instruments on there to be able to measure the water flow, measure environmental conditions. So that's what we're working with them on.
Excellent. So it's a platform to hook up this intermediate scale prototypes.
Right.
In a real system, in real water, in the environment, winter conditions, all that flow, all that energy passing through it.
2 points. One is, one of the things that hasn't been available, you could do this before, but you had to do basically using a barge and either tow or push a barge around. Well, that gets very expensive, so you can't do it for very long. We can put a device in the water for a month or 3 months and really test it.
I remember a project down at East River.
Yep.
10 years ago, maybe?
Yep.
It was one of the companies.
Verdant Technology.
So what happened to that?
Matter of scale-up money. Trying to get enough money to scale it up has been
What size systems were they putting in the water?
They're putting in about 4 meter devices.
So they went big, and it was
bigger, not big. The bigger 10 meter.
So are they not doing it now?
No, they're still working.
They're still. So why? I think how is this project different than that one?
They were doing a commercial development. They weren't doing a test site.
They were actually putting the systems in.
Yeah, they put 4 systems in the water for I think a year.
So I bet you they wish they had this around.
Oh, absolutely.
To do some testing before they went in, and they're still trying to make it viable.
The other point here is we have some concerns about those big systems, those big 10 meter systems and those huge water flows. I mean, they're talking about 10, 12 knots, incredible water flows. We think there's a lot more places in the world that have 4 knots, like the Cape Cod Canal, that if you had a smaller device, you could put a lot more places.
Right.
So we're thinking smaller distributed technology where our test site is perfect for them. Again, it's an intermediate for the big ones, but it's also a good site for the distributed. And this is something that's just becoming a hot topic. We actually had a conference in New Hampshire a year ago. We funded a conference in New Hampshire to talk about distributed generation. And Department of Energy just had one this week.
And distributed generation, for folks that are wondering what that means, typically you have a power plant which is the main source of power, and then that pushes out power through large transmission lines that hit the distribution lines in your neighborhood and come to your house. And that's AC power, the battle of the currents with Tesla and what's the gentleman that GE, Thomas Edison, 100 years ago.
Right.
So that long distances from a central power plant.
Right.
Distributed generation is close to the source where it's going to be used. So ironically, we're coming back to what Thomas Edison was talking about, which is direct current distributed generation. The problem was back then you needed coal to burn or something. Every block in New York City would have its own power plant. It was just not feasible.
One of the reasons that the solar power industry has been successful is because so much distributed generation.
Right.
You have plants where you have a lot of solar and generate a megawatt or 100 megawatts or whatever, but you also have people with solar on their houses.
At your house is a distributed generation.
Right.
So basically it's making power generation much more open to all sorts of points of generation and available to the masses. Just like a solar is a sort of a microcosm of what we're talking about here.
There are a lot of places in the world, people don't understand, there are a lot of places in the world that aren't on grids.
They don't have huge transmission lines.
There are islands, there are indigenous communities in Canada. There are something like 70 indigenous communities in Canada that are on diesel generators. And diesel generators are expensive, 50 cents a kilowatt or to $1 a kilowatt, depending on how far in you have to haul the diesel. Dirty and all those things. So if you can put a turbine in the water rather than having a diesel generator, you're doing good things for everybody.
So the Bourne tidal test site, we're going to show some video here, rolling it, and to talk about what you're viewing on the screen. Essentially, we have some video looking down from the top of the train bridge at the area between one of the piers of the train bridge and the park on the Buzzards Bay side, where a barge comes in, and this is what drove the piles in to create essentially like a girder system with 3 poles, I think it is, that is a permanent, or at least for the period that you have the permit, which is how long?
Well, the initial permit is for a year, but everybody expects it to be extended
So
for 20.
Hopefully many years. It's there, out of the shipping canal. Nobody's going to run into it, hopefully. And we have the footage of what it looks like after it was put in with the barge leaving. So that's a quick couple of clips that people are viewing. It's something that I'm sure if they walk down to the park, they could see it. I'm sure that it's cordoned off, but you could see it up close when you're out walking along the canal or biking. Talk a little bit about why Bourne? Why aren't these all over Europe? I mean, why isn't this done in California? It just seems interesting to me that this hasn't been done already. I mean, France has got the tidal technology. Why don't they have a canal anywhere in France or any area that they could do this?
There are a number of test sites in the world. The biggest one, the real premier test site in the world is the European Marine Energy Center, which is in Scotland.
Okay.
And that center has attracted literally every tidal company, every big tidal company in the world to Orkney Islands in northern Scotland.
Way up north there.
Which is, they literally have no unemployment. If you want to work, you can get a job because of these companies coming in. But that test site is for full-scale devices. Again, the 10-meter devices, and you're talking about 10 to 12 knots of velocity. So very, very demanding environment. You have to put in your own device. You have to put in pilings or ballast. Again, when you're talking about these big devices, you're talking about 100 tons of steel. You're talking about 1,000 tons of ballast. You're putting it in 100 feet of water, over 100 feet of water, and you're doing that in the 20 minutes of slack tide. So it's a very, very demanding thing to do. And that's what they do there. Everybody has to come in and put in their own test site, essentially their own test berth, their own situation. They give you a cable to plug into. They tell you what the area is like. So they give you a lot of help.
Right.
But you have to do your own installation. And so it's still very expensive. And that test site costs about $45 million to build.
Wow.
So you talk about test sites in the U.S., we're building one for wave energy that has over $30 million invested.
Where's that?
Oregon.
Oregon.
So these test sites are incredibly expensive. We're talking about something for the intermediate size for $300,000.
I was going to say, how much?
I mean, the state
$300,000.
got a great deal. We wanted to give the state a great deal because we want to give these developers a good deal. And that's what it is. For $300,000, this thing is something that's not available
So how is
anywhere
this
in the United
funded?
States.
The Seaport Economic Council gave
Right.
you $300,000 grant?
Right.
And then what pays your salary, the overhead, the electricity bill, the website? I mean, is that part of that grant for the first
well,
year?
there's a little bit of indirect on it. It ended up being more complicated, like anything in the ocean ends
course.
up being, and taking longer. So a lot of the match from this came from salaries. And so our match has gone up a lot. we didn't get paid for a lot of the project. But that's okay. I mean, it's important for this to happen. So the people who are involved, with Marico, are involved because they want to do it. They think it's an important thing to do.
So you're the only full-time employee?
No, there was 2 employees, both of them are part-time.
Part-time?
Yep.
You and this other person?
Right.
Okay. And that comes from out of the grant money? There's
Right.
no other contributor to funding other than the
Right.
Seaport Economic
Right.
Council? So this is
We
a state
made
project.
a decision that rather than be a contributory nonprofit, we wanted to be a nonprofit that earned its money through projects.
Contributory meaning
Getting donations.
Getting donations,
Right.
okay.
We'll be happy if someone wants to send us a check.
All right,
but
so now
that's not our
you got the
model.
platform in. It's got a permit for 1 year from the Army Corps of Engineers.
Right.
I presume that did the Bourne Conservation Commission sign off
yeah.
on it, all of that.
State,
And then this
Bourne.
could, based on performance, be extended up to 20 years, you said?
Yes.
Okay. So now you get the platform. You're going to charge fees, presumably, to users.
Right.
And customers come and line up. How many customers at a time can you handle?
One.
One.
It's designed for one device.
Okay.
Although we've also started getting interest from people that are device developers, sensor developers, because they'd like a place to put a sensor in the water for a month, and we can do that for them.
Read in the paper that you have a customer of interest.
Well, we've had 7 companies in the
URI?
last year.
No, isn't that a customer?
URI is one of the companies that's interested. Yeah.
Oh, it's not University of Rhode Island?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. You
Well,
said
I mean,
company.
it's a little tricky. There's an organization at URI called Leading Edge. And they have
Okay.
a very, very new technology, very interesting technology, and have gotten government funding for it, and are interested in testing it sometime. Right now, I don't think they have the funding to do it.
A private company?
They're a group not at URI, at Brown University. And so they got government funding. They have not actually incorporated as a company.
So it's part of Brown University, some sort of
Correct.
think
Research,
tank or whatever. But didn't URI, I thought I read something in the paper about URI.
URI has been very helpful. They've worked with us as well.
So are they going to rent some space?
Right now, we've committed to them to allow them to do some testing of an ADCP, the sensor unit you use for
Sensor
measuring,
unit, okay.
measuring flow, and they're going to do that in December.
So your customers are people with sensors and equipment that will test flow, salinity,
Right.
temperature, et cetera, and the actual generators
Right.
of the hydrokinetic
Right.
models. And so you have 5 or 6 leads, you say,
Yeah.
of companies from around the world.
Yeah. I mean, one, no one's going to commit until you actually have it built.
Right.
So now we're actually looking to get orders, but they also have to, schedule out 6 or 12 months. So it's going to take a while before we get the first one in. But we're looking
Why so
forward to
long?
that.
Why?
Just because when you're developing a device like that, part of your development is this is where we're going to test it.
Gotcha.
So the size of the device you develop and things you do about the development fit that test site. Now there's one in particular that looks like they could be here next summer because they have a test site or have a way to test, but it's not as good as what we have. So they're talking about coming.
So you have the train bridge, the space between the train bridge and the side of the canal.
Right.
Do you have a building at the Buzzards Bay Park, or where do people go to get the information? Where do they set up their lab to monitor?
We have a site in the there's a backup generator building at the bridge.
Army Corps.
And within that fenced area, we have a space to establish.
Army Corps site?
Yeah, Army Corps.
Okay, so you got a little trailer there of some sort that they,
we will, yeah.
now that they would come down every day. What's the data look like from the night before? They've got all the computers and the sensors, and then
Exactly
they would
right.
pay you a lease for the period of
Right.
time. And so you're basically working off the original grant until you get your first customer. And then
Right.
that you'd be sustainable based on the fees that you charge.
Correct.
And then, so the model is to stay pretty small, a couple of employees, or could this
Yep.
grow?
No, we're
About where you
we
want
plan
to
on-
be.
yeah.
And so this could be the platform, for a decade or more
Yep.
going forth.
We have one more employee coming in probably the first of the year, and that's Eben Franks, who's a local person who has a lot of experience in testing. So he's going to be the actual test site manager.
Do you see this kind of being a victim of its own success? What if the first 2 or 3 companies, they got the site, hey, we got the technology down, it's great. They start commercializing it, and it's now out there, and they've cracked the code, if you will, of what they need to do. And 5 years from now, it's ubiquitous, and yeah, we really don't need to go do basic research testing anymore. Do you think there's enough of a long-term market, or would something else develop, whether it's tidal going up and down versus
No,
hydrokinetic?
It's really, there's a long-term market. Again, one test site is not a lot of test sites, so we don't want to flood the market by any means.
No pun intended.
But if you no flood intended, you're right. But if you think about it, I believe, that the current technology is a first generation, and there's going to be future generations. If you think about it, the current generation is something that looks like a wind turbine, right? And a wind turbine is designed off of an airplane wing, which comes from a bird wing. Well, you don't have many bird wings in the ocean. You have different things. You have whale tails and you have fins. So maybe there's a different technology that's better for under the ocean, and we're looking at some of those.
So a corollary would be wind energy systems.
Right.
We have ones from the 70s at Altamont, which were very thin blades, many blades spinning
Yep.
very fast, and they cause bird hazards. But then by the time we get into the 90s and the aughts, as they call it, and the large offshore scale, you're dealing with 3-bladed, massive,
Yep.
2 megawatt, 3 megawatt, 3.6 megawatt facilities.
Going to 10 megawatt.
Going to 10 megawatt. I mean, how big are the blades there? 100 feet?
Yep.
Yeah, you're talking. And so all along that way, that continuum, there was research, testing, scalability. So wind energy's been around for a while, 30, 40 years in terms, not just windmills or people, the misnomer or using
Yep.
for pumping, but wind turbines.
Yep.
This could have a similar arc, if you will.
Yeah, and one of the critical points in the development of wind industry that few people know about is what you mentioned before, the National Renewable Energy Lab. They're in Boulder, Colorado, and the reason they're in Boulder, Colorado is because they established a wind test center there. So they have a number of towers that developers could come in and put their wind
Similar
turbine
model.
up. Exactly right.
So do you
And
think
it was,
they would
by the way, it
invest-
wasn't the highest wind in the world. It was a
Right.
good wind, but not highest wind.
So as you scale up over time, is there the possibility to get some funding from them for just
Yeah,
what we're talking
again,
about
from
here?
Department of Energy. The labs work for the Department of Energy, so they work with.
I think there's actually even a little bit of a tourist attraction here over time. That you got all these thousands of people walking up and down the canal in the summer. You got the park right there. I would recommend maybe you could do a joint education with the National Marine Life Center, who's right there. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Sure.
Yep. Just where the people come in. I don't know if you have a monitor. Maybe you could have a little TV monitor that shows the test bed in action, underwater camera. It's just interesting that I think it's going to generate a lot of curiosity and questions. I know you're not a contributory nonprofit, as you said, people, but if they want to give money.
Absolutely. But you got a good lead into really one of our other missions. One of our missions as a nonprofit is education. So we are working with the Bourne school system, the Sandwich school system. We're trying to develop a better relationship with Mass Maritime Academy, Cape Cod Community College, all of those, because another point here is having a working turbine is a good thing if you want to train students, if you want to train technicians, if you want to train engineers to work on them. You need to have a working turbine.
So you've got the Cape Cod, the canal area chamber right there.
Yep.
How accessible is that trailer that you're talking about? Can people see it from the service road where they walk?
Well, the other part of that is we're working with the Corps of Engineers. You know, the Corps of Engineers has a visitor center.
Okay, so
They're
maybe
very
down at that
interested-
end is you could put up a big bulletin board
Exactly
or something.
right.
Or,
We're talking with them about
Perfect.
having a kiosk there so people could see a little bit.
Here's
about
one
what
for
the-
you, the canal cruises. Now the canal cruises go up and down all
Yep.
the time. I would add that to their spiel that they talk about, because they have the guys that does the trip every day.
Oh, yeah.
He's aching
great
to
idea,
talk
yeah.
about something other than the same story about the island over here, or the bridge in the
We could
1920s.
put a hat out there and they could throw money in it.
Yeah, there you go. Well, you know, you kind of joke, but you know, if it's something that they mention, maybe you do a promotion with them where on that one day they highlight you as an entity that they talk about, and then where they buy the tickets, today's tickets, $1 goes to, who knows. I'm just thinking that it's interesting.
Yeah.
If I were on that tour coming out of onset, driving by, it would be an interesting point of interest that
Right.
one of the world's only test centers, because I guarantee you there are people thinking what most people think. They go, look at all this energy. I wish somebody would do something about
Yeah.
this. And now we can say, we are.
It's a great thing to highlight the the contrast to the bridge, right? The bridge is
Correct.
not new,
Right.
old technology, but still a spectacular structure.
And Kathy
it's brand new technology.
Zegzebski that runs the National Relay Center is awesome, and she's right there. I'm sure if you said hello, tell her I sent you
will,
over there.
I will.
She's a frequent guest on the show.
Oh, great.
Maybe cross promotion, who knows? I always like to kind of get those things. The brand new park that town has invested a lot of money in to get people down there. So all sorts of interesting possibilities with concerts there. It's just something that I think people are going to be very, very fascinated by.
And we're talking about both a kiosk at the visitor center, but also a display of some sort near the site, so people would have an explanation of what it is and
just
see what's going on.
Right there where the restrooms are, a bulletin board, anything that people could get some interest, get their interest in this answered. When you said the summer, that would be the possibility of when the first project customer would come and start to use this. A private company?
Yep.
Okay.
Could be sooner.
And
Okay.
it could be sooner, and then they're looking to do a 3-month lease or 6 months?
2 months is kind of the model we're using
2 months.
because we feel that you need to have a full tidal cycle, and 2 would probably be better.
A full tidal, so you mean with the moon
Yeah.
going around? Okay,
Right.
because it does have different
Different
average
velocities, yep.
elevations of the water. If they said, hey, we want another 2 months, if you don't have it booked, they can just book it, right? Like a
Absolutely.
hotel room, right?
Yep.
Keep booking. We'll be here for a year.
Yep.
Sure. So we have hydrokinetic, which is the flow of water around some sort of spinning
Right.
object, where the blades of some shape that, like you say,
Right.
may be different for hydrokinetic than wind. Then what about the vertical up and down? Are you looking
Again,
at that?
Well, we're not right now. The newest thing in that is something called lagoon. So rather than having an estuary that you seal off, you build a round lagoon. And the water raises and fills it up, and then as the water comes out, it generates electricity. Now that, to me, is kind of interesting because, you could make that into an aquaculture site, right? You have fish in the middle, and it generates the electricity. One of the things people don't realize is aquaculture, ocean-based aquaculture, is very energy intensive. And
Really?
to generate that electricity, they end up having diesel generators, which is not a
What are
good
they using
thing.
electricity for?
Feeding the fish, circulating the fish, things like
They
that.
have boats driving around
Yep.
doing it? But they use electricity?
They do. Diesel generators, yep. If you look at the big like salmon pens
Yeah.
in the ocean, yeah, they need
okay.
electricity on those.
Wow, interesting. I think the ocean, obviously, 3/4 of the planet, is huge amounts of potential, deep water, these choke points, if you will.
Yep. Well, they say that 90% of the world's population lives within 50 miles of a coastline.
I believe it.
And tidal energy could probably provide about half of the current electrical needs of the world. It continues to go up, but right now, wave energy could provide twice, is the estimate, twice the demand, the current demand of electricity. The tremendous amount of
So now the question,
energy.
though, of course, is how do you get the electrons to the users if you're out in the ocean? And there's there's different ways of storing energy. Potential energy, there's making the electrons,
Sure.
getting a big cord, such as the wind farms where they link all of the turbines to a central station, or a couple of them, and those link up to a big cable that goes, like a plug back to the mainland.
Right.
Is that the intent for these type of projects, is to scale them up to have in a channel a whole array and
That's
then
what
the big cable?
That's what we're working on with the Muskega Channel.
Gotcha.
We know we could get 5 megawatts of power out of Muskega Channel. We could get perhaps 20. And the point is, here's a channel that is close to shore, so you're not talking about running a cable 20, 30 miles out into the ocean.
Right.
So easy to service, below the water line so you don't see them. And fast water tends to be water that fish don't spend a lot of time in. They prefer slower water. So it's also a place you don't have a lot of fishermen. So it's a great location, and that's one of the things we're doing, is trying to help the town of Edgartown develop that.
Excellent, excellent. But that's going to be developed based on some of the technologies that come out of this platform.
Could be, yeah.
Okay. Well, the other form I was thinking about is that if you're further away, use the electricity to, I think it's called electrolyze the H2O and break off the hydrogen.
Yep.
And so now you got hydrogen, which is carbon-free, no emissions, no negative emissions other than water vapor, I think. And you would densify it in large-scale tanker,
Yep.
situations, and then bring the hydrogen back for fuel. Is that a possibility, you think?
There are people that are looking at that.
People are looking at that.
A number of different technologies. That simple one that's in use is called pump storage, right? You pump water when you have electricity, when
Potential
the turbine,
energy, so you
up
got
to a mountaintop.
They do
and
that
then
with-
it's stored up there and it can come back down. So that's done today.
You
There
know,
are
it's
people looking at
Yeah.
bladders on the bottom of the ocean because you have a lot of pressure there. If you filled up a bladder with oxygen or air when the turbine was turning, then when it stopped, that bladder would compress and release air that could be used to turn the turbine. So a lot of interesting technologies that are being proposed.
Well, in Connecticut, where I used to live, they did exactly that. They pumped the water from up to a man-made lake, and then they went down and they pumped it back up
Yep.
the river, and they pumped it more cheaply at night, and then ran it down during the day. So made a difference. And then there's other types of technology where they store energy in ice, and they use that ice for air conditioning systems. So they take the solar, make ice, and then it's just this fascinating way of converting energy into different forms. So this is sort of science 101, all the different types of ways that sunlight, photons, which is all the source of our energy, is translated into different ways. Wind is a form of solar. People don't realize that's convection. That's the different. So that wind is blowing because the hot air is being pulled up southwest. Wind up in Buzzards Bay is convection. It gets really hot, balmy in August. It starts blowing southwest hard up the canal. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, but as you point out, most renewables are not continuous, they're intermittent. And one of the biggest problems is that if you're operating the grid is not very predictable on a second-to-second basis. I mean, within a second, things change a lot. Everybody turns on their AC when they get home from work. Things like that change very quickly. How do you supply the power when you have solar and wind, which are predictable on the order of a couple of hours? They almost dropped the grid in Texas a couple of years ago because the wind dropped off too fast and they weren't ready for it.
Well,
so
this is
you've got to have that storage to make up for it. The nice thing about tidal,
the
nice thing about tidal is it's totally predictable. you can predict how much tidal there is going to be on, December the 6th.
Presuming the moon still orbits
in 100
the Earth,
years.
right?
Well, yeah,
Moon base 1999.
Yeah.
The moon goes away, then we're in trouble.
Things are slowing down. The Earth slows down because of gravitational pull, so it'll change a little bit. But basically, over 100 years, you could predict it. So, compared with other things, it's very predictable. And so, from the grid operator's perspective, it's a valuable source of energy.
Could we theoretically, along both shorelines of the canal, put a line of these and just go up on either side, put 100 of them, 50 and, all 11 miles, every 100 feet, put one of these things? I have no idea. I'm just curious.
The biggest problem is the closer you get to shore, the slower the velocity.
Mm-hmm.
So you lose most of your energy as you get close to shore. If you come out into the water, you get into the channel, and as the Corps will tell you, the channel today is too small.
It is too small.
I mean, some of the ships have to go around now. So, they jealously protect every square inch of that
I
channel.
thought about the other end where the Canal Electric is. They used to take the oil in, and they had a little rest area, if you will. I thought, what about making that a flume and putting a bunch of them in there?
You could. I mean, again, I don't know what the flow characteristics are there.
And you get the infrastructure for the interconnection with the large amounts of power. Just to give people a sense of what we say when we say a megawatt, it's about 1,000 homes. That's the rule of thumb.
1,000, 1,600, yeah.
Yeah, in that range. And we are losing two major baseload power plants in this region on the order of 2 gigawatts. So a gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. So 2,000 megawatts. So you're looking at, a couple 100,000 homes, 300,000 homes or more. And that is Pilgrim Nuclear, which is a base load, considered base load. And that's the base load, and then they stack the pricing up for any day when they buy power from ISO New England. That's always the first they go to, because it's base power, base load power, to meet that surge up and down. And then we're losing, we've already lost Brayton Point, coal-fired, and that was, I think, 600, 800, 900 megawatts in that range. I had my problems with that facility when they were heating up Mount Hope Bay with cooling down the waste steam. They were affecting the environment. And instead of coming up with a way to use the waste steam and capturing all that energy, they created those 2 huge cooling towers. If you go over the bridge in Somerset there, it is to me, an embarrassment and a failure of environmental policy between the EPA, the DEP, and Dominion Power. How, for the viewers that don't know, those 2 cooling towers that look like 3 Mile Island and nuclear cooling towers cost over $600 million to build, and they'll be abandoned within 10 years. That is a catastrophe. The ratepayers for Dominion Power, the investors, not to mention the electricity. For every ton of concrete is an enormous amount of embedded energy to create those. So those are the types of things I hope we avoid in the future. But the reality is we're losing those 2 major power plants. We're buying maybe some from hydrokinetic up in hydroelectric, which is different than hydrokinetic. Hydroelectric is the dams releasing the water up in Canada. There's enormous amounts of hydroelectric from Canada that we're looking at purchasing. The controversy there is the transmission lines and where they're coming into New England through New York or through these sensitive mountain passes up in New Hampshire and in the ancient forests up there that they want to protect. The northern woods, the northern kingdom, if they call it. The
reality of energy is energy projects are big. And if you have a big project, someone is going to have an impact. There's no energy project that doesn't have impacts on somebody. And, we don't get in the business of advocating for projects, except for Muskeget, because we're supporting the town there. Because that's a political decision.
So are they
that's the politics of deciding where things go.
You're consulting with them? Are they paying you a consulting fee?
No.
You're volunteering?
We do it as part of our mission, but also because they've always guaranteed us a test site when it's done.
Oh, so that's another test site.
That would be the full-scale test site.
Oh, so you've got a potential lease agreement with
Right.
them for that.
So we'd have 1 meter testing at Conti
Oh.
Fish Center, 3 meters in the Bourne in the Cape Cod Canal, and then 10 meters in the.
And you would have control of all those.
Yep.
So you're involved in all
Well,
stages.
Conti's a federal facility, so
Okay.
we don't have control. We have an agreement with them to help companies test there.
Excellent. And the first one was this very small one. You're involved in that one at the UMass Dartmouth.
Well, Conti Fish Center, yeah.
Oh, that's where that is.
Right.
Okay. All right. And are you permitting the next level at Muskeget? Muskeget? Was it Muskeget?
Muskeget.
Muskeget.
We had a preliminary permit with FERC there, and
Federal
are
Energy.
hoping Federal Regulatory Energy Commission. I'm sorry, Federal Energy FERC.
FERC.
We had a preliminary permit. We are in the process of trying to get a pilot license, but there's some things we need to do.
So you could theoretically offer a contract for a developer from boom, boom, boom.
Yep.
That type of situation. That's excellent. That's excellent. And so this feeds into what we were talking about, I mentioned earlier, the blue economy. Have
Yep.
you heard that term?
Absolutely.
Why don't you explain a little bit what you might think that entails? If people
Well,
haven't
the
heard
blue
that.
economy is all of the economic pieces that are dependent upon the ocean, both directly and indirectly. So, there are a lot of tourism, transportation, a lot of different things, but energy is one of those. And energy from the perspective of generating electricity for use in this region, but also from the perspective of developing companies that could export. So if you talk about the test site being for smaller devices for distributed generation, there are several companies in this region that could develop technologies using that test site, establish the manufacturing here and export it. You know, one of the problems with wind is the factories are in Europe. The turbine factories are in Europe. Now, we hope they're going to build factories here because of the demand, and that certainly looks like it's a probability, but not a guarantee.
Right.
If you develop the company here, we're the ones building them.
They're large scale. We just learned that Cape Wind finally gave up
Yep.
the fight after 16 years. But there are huge wind lease areas southwest of Nantucket.
Yep.
Is there any velocity out there where you could co-locate these
We've thought about
devices?
turbines because there's some current out there.
Right.
More likely, and the thing we've also been exploring is wave energy. If
So
you've got
rising and falling.
Yep.
Right.
If
So you
you've
could take
got-
advantage of their connection to the grid.
Exactly right. You've got the connection to the grid. You've got a platform because some of these are arms that extend from platform and can go up and down.
I would just think anything that articulates.
Yeah.
And it's got a gear ratio
Yeah.
on the backside is
Yeah,
just
like a
translate
pump.
that motion into.
Just like a pump.
Right. Right. So that could be tested on your platform too.
Sure. Not a good test. I mean, again, we're more about velocity than about waves. One of the advantages of this site is that it doesn't have a lot of wave action. So you're
Okay.
really focusing on velocity.
I think that's an attractive concept to have multiple forms of gathering energy at the same platform where you've invested. I would think those companies may be looking at that very seriously because once you got the hardwire connection, adding on other forms of generation is going to make the economies that much better. I would think.
Not
No?
really. I mean, at this point, the challenges of getting the turbines in, because this is deeper water. Cape Wind, in comparison, was a
I'm
relatively
talking
simple
presuming
project.
that you get them out there.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
500
But right
of them out
now,
there.
right now, they're focused on getting them out there.
Right.
You got to build platforms for that deep water, and
So let's say
there's
they build
challenges to doing
250 of them out there. They've got the big cable to Nantucket. Now
Then-
they're sweetening the pot by adding.
that. At that point, wave
Right.
would be interesting.
So now all of a sudden, but you've thought about it when you put the cable out so you have room to grow, you're now having that make the economic picture and pay down the investment for the original
Yeah.
system, much shorter.
Yeah, at that point it would, but again, right now,
Yeah.
the challenges they have of those big projects are enough just for the wind.
Right. The other one is, again, you get wave, you've got the tidal going this way, but tidal going this way. So I'm thinking like a collar, and it rises up the column and goes down the column. And don't they have all sorts of snakes on the ocean that just kind of oscillate up and down?
We've talked about putting salmon cages or fish cages under those platforms. You have a platform that has an area underneath it, put fish there. So I mean, there are a lot of potential opportunities. But
so isn't that interesting? As you talked about one thing, it turns out that once you're there, you could create a multi-tiered business model that's doing multiple things for food, energy, research, what have you. Again, the ocean's providing a whole bunch of things that we need long term.
But again, initially, if you're talking about putting 8, 10 megawatt turbines out there on 300-foot platform or 300-foot towers, 300 feet above the water level, plus 100 feet below, a couple hundred feet below, that's enough to keep you busy, give you plenty of nightmares for a long time, and not worry about other things.
What's the biggest ones that are installed off of like Denmark and England? Are they up to that size yet?
They're just getting up to that size. When you hear about wind in Europe, overwhelmingly it's shallow water. And the unfortunate consequence of Cape Wind and its problems, and again, I'm not saying good or bad about Cape Wind, but just the consequence of that is that all of the development in the U.S. is being pushed at least 12 miles offshore. That pushes it into deeper water. The cost of developing something like Cape Wind is about $2 million a megawatt. The cost of developing something in the deeper water is $6 to $7 million a megawatt. So there's a big difference in.
But you maybe could put more of them out there. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, again,
we mentioned Cape Wind. It's done, it's over. But whether you were for or against it, I would think you would have to recognize that Jim Gordon invested a lot of money that has created the opportunities for those that will follow, whether it's deep water or not. They created an entire new management agency, all the permitting, all the thought processes behind the cable. That in of itself was a major leap forward and got this country moving
Cape
forward.
Wind made its share of mistakes, certainly in terms of public engagement, but in terms of starting a new industry before there were any regulations.
So in the last minute we have left here, let's say the website again.
Marico, New England, MRECO, newengland.org.
And John Miller, Executive Director at 508-728-5825. We look forward to seeing the platform in use this summer. Look for any opportunities to get some information at the visitor centers we talked about, and wish you the best of luck. And we're really excited to have you on board. Welcome aboard.
Great. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
everybody for watching. We'll see you again in 2018. Have a great holiday season, everyone.